The agenda this week explored why it can be harder for adults to make new friends, asked why more permanent residents to this country aren't becoming citizens, and learned how the awful practice of blackface came to Canada. The agenda's week in review begins considering the fate of the Line 5 pipeline. Let's look at a map of Enbridge's Line 5. The pipeline starts at the city of Superior in Wisconsin, then moves east, crossing into Michigan. There it travels across under the environmentally sensitive Straits of Mackinac, which are waterways that connect Lake Michigan and Lake Huron. Then Line 5 stretches south and east to the southern tip of Lake Huron, ending in Sarnia, Ontario. Heather, I'm going to come to you first. What role does Line 5 play in Canada and the US's economy, energy economy today?
Great. Well, thanks for the question. It has about over 500,000 barrels a day of petroleum. It turns into gasoline, jet fuel, propane, other petroleum products. 500,000 is very significant, and it obviously feeds a large swath of Ontario, Quebec, feeds most of Pearson Airport, and also has impacts across the northeast Michigan, Indiana, Wisconsin, and elsewhere. So it is a very important pipeline. It delivers a large amount of petroleum and has tens of billions of dollars of impact and an economic situation there.
Michelle, given the importance of Line 5 in keeping supply chains robust, energy, the cost of fuel manageable, the homes heated and other functions, can communities thrive without it?
Yes, absolutely. One of the first questions when I came into doing this work was how are we going to meet our energy needs without Line 5? Because I wanted to make sure that if I was going to be advocating for shutting down this pipeline in order to protect the Great Lakes, that we wouldn't be leaving Canadians in the dark or in the cold. So I had a report that was commissioned out to an industry expert who has decades of experience working on relevant analysis related to the scope of the report that I had done. And that report found that, yes, in fact, we can meet our crude oil energy needs today without Line 5.
All right, Warren, I'm going to come to you. Let's talk about sort of the widespread implications if Line 5 ceases operations. Let's short-term and long-term.
So short-term, the refineries in Sarnia that do provide a lot of those refined products, gasoline, diesel, jet fuel, that refinery would be starved. They would have to scramble in the very short term to find another source. There is quite a bit of discussion about how other pipes could be used to feed those refineries and to feed that demand. And I do agree that there probably are ways that it could be done. Whether or not it could be put into play in the short term, how long it would take to get those new supply lines in place, I think is a question. Immediately, you would see a price impact because there would be a supply constraint, and that would impact consumers in Ontario and Quebec. It would impact consumers on the Great Lakes states as well. In the longer term, I do think that, yes, we could find some of these alternatives. There are potentially other pipeline pathways. There are potentially other ways to move crude around, but it would have a lot of disruption in the short term.
Liz, what risks does Line 5 pose to the safety of the Great Lakes?
Well, thank you. This conversation really needs a little more context of the fact that this is a 70-year-old pipeline that's located in the open waters of the Straits of Mackinac, which is one of the worst possible places for a catastrophic oil spill, according to the University of Michigan. It has far-reaching implications for both Canada and the U.S. It could potentially destroy drinking water supplies and impact over 700 miles of private and public properties, both in Canada and the U.S. This is the wrong pipeline in the wrong location. The Great Lakes, of course, represent some 20% of the planet's fresh surface water. Over 25% of Canadians receive their water from the Great Lakes. and the the significance of the Great Lakes cannot be underestimated. I also just want to mention that the location of these pipelines is in a high density shipping location, and multiple anchors have struck and hit the pipeline over the past couple of years, and there are other incidences that we may not even be aware of. But make no mistake, if an anchor struck and burst these pipelines, the magnitude of the harm would be extraordinary. And the best case scenario of a 30% cleanup would just destroy this extraordinary shared resource that both Canadians, the U.S. and multiple sovereign nations share in their stewardship duties.
I think men, if I can locate it there, I think we're doing our best.
Yeah.
And actually, I think we do quite well, given everything. And sometimes the way that we have these conversations, we sort of center around the deficiencies of men in our communication skills, our emotional literacy, and all these sorts of things, oftentimes measuring us against our female counterparts. Instead of looking at the ways in which men create space for vulnerability and relationship building, despite not necessarily having the adeptness at speaking about and articulating emotions in the way that many women have come to do. For example, I recently was with a friend, and similar to your story, he invited me over for a meal. And as he was barbecuing chicken, did we begin to have a conversation about his issues with his girlfriend and feelings of isolation and issues around career. And so there are ways that I think men and a lot of people are attempting to adapt to and resist against loneliness and create relationships and repair where needed to. And I think men do a really good job of that. I think one thing that we do well is centering around activities. A lot of communication for men is nonverbal and paraverbal. And so it's through the pickup games and the basketball and the barbecues or whatever. I know those are all very stereotypical men things. We're actually building those bonds. And as you spoke about, we're getting in those hours that create that relation, best friends.
Yeah. And I think in a weird way, one of the silver linings of the pandemic is that it made this a lot easier for guys. In that prior to the pandemic, to admit to certain weaknesses, let's say, might have been a little bit more difficult for men. But in the context of a pandemic, everyone's going through some major things. And so to admit that you yourself are going through some things is not as stark of a difference, right? It's like, yeah, me too. We're in a pandemic. What do you want to talk about? I'm here to talk about you. And so that has always been kind of one of the interesting things I've found in the last few years is that the guys in my life, maybe it's because of more long-lasting cultural changes, but I think it's certainly some kind of effect of the pandemic, is that they're a lot more open to talking about what's going on in their lives.
David, I do want to return to something that you did say when you were giving sort of a list of examples of things that people can do. Potentially, there can be barriers to accessing some of that stuff. And I am curious, how do social and economic circumstances affect the way people socialize and interact with each other?
Yeah, so I began by talking about the fact that men build relationship in proximity, but through activity. If there are financial and economic barriers in a city, and in many cities, which is changing, gentrifying, locking people out of communal space, there's an absence, and I think some of what you do in the online space is trying to respond to that, but there's an absence of communal gathering spaces where we would come together, where there's a sort of organizing principle or a way of which we could all be together. We're all in one accord. We're all sort of divided up into these little tribal groups right now, and that just adds to that feeling of separation. If one is already experiencing financial hardship or not only finances, but even the way in which the city is laid out, there are parts of the city that exist in a bit of a silo and don't have the opportunities to go to a particular basketball court or go to the cottage with your friends. That it changes. One of the things, especially for young men, I'm finding in the ways in which they try to respond to this is the sort of uptake of streaming culture and gaming culture. Now, we know, and you're the psychologist, you could speak to how that might breed some instances of mental health and other concerns, but for a lot of men, it's where they build relationships. That as they're playing these games with someone who's maybe not even in the city, they're creating that connection. And so men of all types, I think, are responding as best they can, but financial and economic disparities can limit that for a lot of men.
I'm going to get you to respond to that as well.
Yeah, certainly I think when anybody's experiencing feelings of insecurity or scarcity, especially economically, right, I think friendships can get bumped down the priority list quite a bit, right, in terms of our hierarchy of needs. It's probably more important in our minds to take care of sort of our economic security and stability. I think to your point around video games, I mean, I'm a firm believer in taking any social opportunities that you might have and capitalizing on them, right? So video games and online communities provide a space for people to connect with one another, even if it's at a distance.
Right.
That's certainly better than nothing at all.
Right.
All right, Chloe, how do quality friendships contribute to setting healthy relationship standards and boundaries?
I mean, when you have quality friendships, you can learn from your friends and see, I mean, you gain perspective from your relationships and your friendships. And I always say, like, I think it's so important, and I speak from a women's perspective, for us to really diversify our friend groups, meet people from all different walks of life, all different backgrounds, many different life experiences, because when you have friends that have experienced things that maybe you're going through, you become empowered and you learn from them. You gain knowledge, you gain the skills just based off of seeing your friends kind of navigate the same stuff that you have done.
This is the story. Immigrants who come to Canada and become permanent residents don't rush to become citizens. So according to Statistics Canada, in 2001, 75% of permanent residents became citizens within 10 years of their arrival. In 2016, that number was 60%. In 2021, that number was down to 46%. Do we know why this is the case?
We don't know. We can speculate. There are many theories, from application fees, processing times, underemployment, isolation, people not being able to have fun and enjoy the beautiful and enjoyable parts of Canada that make life worth living here. But I think the fact that we don't know, actually, for me, is the more revealing statistic, because nobody's really checked. And I think this speaks really volumes about Canada's attitude towards immigrants. We've assumed for so long that since we're not an officially xenophobic country, and because we have such a long tradition of immigration here, and successful immigration, that people will just want to keep coming, and that their lives will just continue to be fine and good, that the future will just be like the past. What this data, I think, starts to reveal is that actually maybe that history of immigration, that legacy of citizenship, is coming undone. The machine is starting to slow down. What does that mean, not just for immigrants' condition here, but about the country and about our future? So the fact that nobody's checked, actually, for me, is by far the more revealing thing. And we're now working pretty feverishly to try and see if we can get to the bottom of this, because the implications for Canada, at least in my opinion, are going to be pretty stark if we can't reverse this trend.
Data, data, data. Very important stuff. In terms of the conditions themselves that you're mentioning, what are they?
Well, I think that we're finding a couple of major trends. So first and foremost, the profile of the typical immigrant who's coming here has changed a lot. So when my parents came to Canada in the 1970s, one had a high school degree, one didn't yet. They spoke very little English. And so, my dad, for example, saw no problem in getting up on Monday morning in Toronto and driving to Belleville, where he worked in a factory, until Friday, and coming home when my mom finished her studies. They had no immediate expectations of home ownership or having a senior executive job or anything like that. Today, of course, Canada's attracting a far higher caliber of talent from around the world, people with higher skills and education, credentials, very advanced job experience. And of course, with that come many quality of life benefits, people who were homeowners, people who had domestic help in many cases, depending on the country that they came from, where that can be relatively affordable. And so coming to Canada, instead of everything being a future possibility and everything looking up, in fact, many are taking steps back and are wondering now aloud whether that step back will be permanent and whether it's worth it to sort of stick it out and see if you can retain your or regain your status. So I think the caliber of immigrants are changing a lot, and our narrative of who immigrants are has not evolved commensurately. We still have this idea of, $5 in your pocket, put your head down, work hard, et cetera. That was my parents. That was many people. There are still people who arrive that way, but many, many who don't. And until our settlement services, our economic attitudes, our hiring practices can adjust to the reality of who the contemporary immigrant is, we'll continue to fall short here.
I want to stick on the who a little bit. Historically, this has changed in terms of where people are coming from to Canada. Do we have an idea of where most of our permanent, or rather say our newcomers, are coming from?
I mean, India, China, and the Philippines is the short answer. Will make up more than half in any given year. Obviously, it fluctuates. But the origins of newcomers have changed throughout our history. There was, English, Scottish, Irish. Then, we moved to other parts of Europe. Ukrainians, obviously, populated large parts of the West. Now there's people coming from Southeast Asia and East Asia. The future looks likely to be more African. I think that this is part of Canada's interesting history, is our ability to welcome people from around the world, so long as they're committed to their future being Canadian. This is a central core of our identity. We can talk about it perhaps later. The citizenship numbers, in my opinion, are alarming because they call into question whether people are actually committed to their future being Canadian. That's the major disruption that we're starting to observe. In terms of other demographics, newcomers tend to be almost twice as likely as the average Canadian to hold a bachelor's degree. They are, on balance, far younger. Half of Canadians are, over 41, and newcomers are, 80% are under that age. So they're younger, better educated. They come with, few brand loyalties and
Right.
few preconceptions and very rich prospects.
Let's start with the broader question. When did this practice of white people putting on so-called blackface begin in North America?
Right. So it really starts in the early 19th century. So we're talking about the 1810s, but it's really in the 1820s, early 1830s, where you have professional people writing songs and caricature, blackface caricature. And in particular, we really locate the origin of this to someone named Thomas Dartmouth Daddy Rice, or T.D. Rice, who essentially created a character in 1831-32 named Jim Crow. And Jim Crow is the first character who's wearing blackface, sort of dancing out a kind of mimic dance of an enslaved person, and he hits the stage and tours the Atlantic world.
And did it become a hit right away?
Yes, it's called instant. Back then, 19th century, instant hit means it took about 5 years, right? It didn't happen instantaneously, but yes, by the early 1840s, that Daddy Rice is then mimicked by another group named the Virginia Minstrels, who essentially take his original idea as an individual person and they turn it into a troupe. So now it's like a collective of people in blackface. And then eventually through the 1850s, it's an ensemble. There's 3 parts to the show, and it becomes essentially the beginning of an entertainment industry.
And it's always white people putting on the makeup to pretend to be black people.
Until after the US Civil War.
Okay.
Then it changes.
How about Canada? When did it come to Canada?
Immediately. So T.D. Rice invents this Jim Crow character in 1831 too. By 1836, we have documented evidence in newspapers of a Jim Crow character performing in Ontario, at least. Can't confirm across the rest of the country. So is that T.D. Rice, or is that somebody else pretending to be Jim Crow? Again, I can't confirm that, but we're talking about within a few years. It's in the country.
And they came to be known as minstrel shows, and I wonder if you could tell me how did the Canadian Railroad, what role did it play in minstrel shows reaching out across the country?
Well, first to the name. So just quickly to the name. The name is completely random. I think everyone really needs to understand that. There was a family who were called the Tyrolese minstrel family, and they were from Switzerland. They came to America in the early 1840s, and they just liked the name, so they took the name. So the name minstrel kind of relates to a performer, but it really doesn't have any innate meaning. As for the railroad, the reality is that if we think about how we travel today, in terms of how things get here, you need a transportation system in order for people to come to town. In order for large productions to move across borders and space and place, you need to have a transportation system to move them. So once the railroad started to build out, especially in Ontario in the 1850s and 60s, that's kind of the beginning of, oh, now that we have a means to bring in large sets, large pieces of machinery, and large, just generally construction type materials, we can build theaters. We can now build larger sets. So you kind of have the beginning of the infrastructure to support an entertainment industry.
And was the motivation behind it always to pejoratively or nefariously caricature Black people?
Yes, I mean, it's just unequivocal. There is really no debating it. From the moment that T.D. Rice puts on blackface, he's actually mimicking a Black person that he saw earlier in the day. So the origins of the genre is always steeped in Black caricature. As the genre develops through the decades, the narratives expand. There's narratives about slavery. There's narratives about it. Freedom-seeking African Americans who end up in the North. There's minstrel shows about that. So literally, it didn't really matter what the show was. The topic of the performance was the Black body.
That's just some of what we've covered this week. You can find more, including the full conversations, on our website, tvo.org, our YouTube channel at youtube.com/theagenda, or our Twitter feed, twitter.com/theagenda.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.